Your family's survival hinges on the muddy water rising in the Nile. For the ancient Egyptians, the river's annual flood was both a lifeline and a looming catastrophe, a mystery of timing they had to solve. This video uncovers how a civilization without satellites or computers mastered the art of predicting the Nile's behavior. You will learn the secret system of celestial observation and sacred architecture that allowed them to foresee the future. We will explore why a specific star's appearance signaled the coming deluge and how priests measured the river's pulse with stone steps. What do you believe is the true mark of a brilliant civilization? That thin layer of dark, fertile mud was everything. Without it, there was no Egypt. This is why the ancient Egyptians called their home Kemet, the Black Land, a stark ribbon of life squeezed between the endless red land of the desert. The Nile's flood was the very heartbeat of their civilization, a single annual pulse that determined life or death for millions. When the river rose, it didn't just bring water. It carried the land itself, a soup of mineral-rich silt washed down from distant highlands. As the waters slowly receded, they left behind a fresh, damp blanket of the most fertile soil on Earth, ready for farmers to plant their seeds. But this heartbeat was dangerously unpredictable. A weak pulse, a flood that was too low, meant the silt would not reach all the fields. The land would thirst, crops would fail, and the terrifying specter of famine would stalk the kingdom. Yet a pulse that was too strong, a flood that was too high, was perhaps even more terrifying. Rampaging waters could obliterate villages, sweep away granaries, and drown entire regions, leaving ruin in their wake. The difference between a golden harvest and total catastrophe was a matter of inches in the river's height. So the question was not just when the flood would come, but how powerfully it would arrive. The survival of a civilization hung in the balance, dependent on reading the river's intentions long before its waters began to swell. To read the river's intentions, the Egyptians built stone oracles along its banks. These were the Nilometers, the most sophisticated water gauges of the ancient world. They were not mere measuring sticks but sacred instruments where science and religion flowed together as one. The simplest design was a single, elegant column planted directly in the river, its surface marked with precise cubits and digits. As the waters rose, priests would read the level directly from this stone sentinel. A more common design was a staircase carved from the riverbank, descending deep into the water. Each step was a marker, and as the priests walked down, they were literally descending into the rising pulse of the Nile itself. But the most advanced Nilometers were architectural marvels. These were deep, cylindrical stone wells connected to the river by a carefully engineered tunnel. A priest would descend into the cool, echoing chamber, his torchlight flickering on the water that rose silently from below, perfectly mirroring the level of the great river outside. This was not a public tool, it was a state secret, a divine ritual. The measurements taken here dictated the kingdom's entire economic future. They determined the tax rate for farmers, the distribution of grain from the royal granaries, and ultimately the fate of the pharaoh's reign. The number read from the sacred stone was a prophecy, one that shaped the laws of the land. The sacred number read from the Nilometer stone was the key. Imagine a priest, a silhouette against the bright sky, descending a narrow staircase carved into the riverbank. His bare feet meet cool, damp stone as he walks down, step by step, into the rising water. His goal is to find the precise line where the Nile's touch meets the carved hieroglyphics. Each step was a marker, and the units of measurement were as ancient as the land itself. They used the cubit, the length from a man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger. This was not a rough estimate, but a standardized royal cubit, meticulously carved into the stone, often subdivided into smaller units called digits, like the width of a finger. The number of cubits the water rose was a direct prophecy. If the river only reached 12 cubits, a murmur of dread would pass through the priesthood. This was the number of hunger. The floodwaters were too meager, leaving vast fields dry and unfertilized. Taxes would be lowered, but the granaries would strain to feed the people. 16 cubits, however, was the number of abundance. It was the sweet spot, the perfect flood that would deposit a rich, life-giving layer of silt across the entire floodplain, promising a harvest that would fill the granaries to bursting. But 19 cubits was the number of disaster. This was a deluge, a furious river that would not recede but destroy, swallowing villages and wiping out the very fields it was meant to nourish. Think of it not as a simple measurement, but as a civilization's thermostat. Just a few degrees in either direction meant the difference between comfortable prosperity and a struggle for survival, all read from the waterline on a stone step. These stone prophets were not scattered randomly along the river. They formed a strategic network, a chain of early warning stations that tracked the flood's progress from its southern origins to the northern delta. The first and most crucial sentinel stood far to the south on the island of Elephantine at Aswan. Here, at the traditional border of Egypt, the Nile's character changes, flowing from the rocky highlands into the wide, flat floodplain. The Nilometer at Elephantine was the kingdom's lookout post. Because the floodwaters traveled from the south, this instrument gave the very first reading, the initial whisper of the river's intent. When the priests of Elephantine saw the water begin to climb their sacred steps, they knew a message of immense importance had to fly northward. Riders on swift boats would carry the crucial cubit measurement downriver, a herald of the coming tide. This first number gave the central government in Memphis a vital head start, a prediction of what was to come. As that first wave of water traveled north, it would next be measured at the heart of the kingdom itself, at the Nilometer on Rhoda Island in Memphis. This was the capital's own oracle, the instrument that dictated the fate of the most populous and fertile region of Egypt. The reading here confirmed or contradicted the early report from the south. If Elephantine reported 16 cubits of promise, but Rhoda Island later recorded only 12, the priests knew the life-giving waters had been lost somewhere along the journey, perhaps absorbed by a thirstier land or diverted. This cascading system of measurement transformed a single event into a moving story. It was not just one number, but a series of numbers that painted a picture of the flood's strength and reach as it marched through the land. The priests were not just reading water levels, they were tracking a pulse, feeling its rhythm and power as it moved through the body of the nation. This network turned a mystery into a forecast, giving the pharaoh's administration the precious time needed to prepare for abundance or brace for disaster. But how could they possibly know when to even start looking for the flood? The river's rise was not a random event, and the Egyptians had discovered its most reliable celestial alarm clock. The priests who read the river's pulse were more than holy men. They were Egypt's earliest data scientists. Each day during the flood season, a designated scribe would make his way to the cool, shadowed chamber of the Nilometer. His tools were simple, but his task was monumental. Dipping his measuring rod or reading the water-marked steps, he would call out the day's cubit measurement to an assistant, who would carefully note it on a fresh papyrus scroll. This was not a casual observation. The scribe recorded the date, the precise water level, and often notes on the water's color and speed. This daily ritual transformed the abstract rise and fall of the river into a hard numerical fact, a single data point in a story that unfolded over weeks. But these men were not just collecting numbers for the present moment. Their true genius lay in their understanding of time. Every scroll from every flood season was treated as a precious resource. They were meticulously labeled, bundled, and stored away in the vast temple libraries alongside astronomical charts and religious texts. Year after year, decade after decade, this process created something extraordinary, a sprawling historical archive of the Nile's behavior. Imagine shelves upon shelves of papyrus, each roll containing the vital signs of a single year, the lifeblood of the nation recorded in ink and fiber. This was their long-term memory, By studying these archives, a priest could look back at a scroll from 20 years prior and see that a specific celestial event had been followed by a 16-cubit flood. He could identify cycles, noticing that years of weak floods sometimes clustered together, followed by a period of abundance. They were searching for the river's rhythm in the data, looking for patterns that transcended a single season. This archive was their secret weapon, a cumulative knowledge that allowed them to move from simply recording the flood to, in a sense, beginning to understand its personality. The river's past, carefully preserved, became the key to anticipating its future. That long-term memory of the river revealed an even deeper secret written in the stars. High above the desert, a brilliant point of light held the final piece of the puzzle. The star we call Sirius, the brightest in the night sky, was known to the Egyptians as Sothis, and its behavior was their celestial clock. For a period of about 70 days each year, Sothis would vanish completely from the night sky, swallowed by the glare of the sun. Its reappearance was a dramatic event known as the heliacal rising. This was the first moment just before dawn when the star could be glimpsed again for a fleeting instant on the eastern horizon, a sparkling herald immediately before the sun washed out the sky. The precision of this event was uncanny. It happened on the same day every year, a fact the Egyptians had verified through centuries of observation, and this is where the coincidence felt like a divine miracle. The heliacal rising of Sothis, that single, predictable day, consistently coincided with the very beginning of the Nile's annual flood. Imagine the profound reassurance this must have brought. While the priests were tracking the river's physical pulse with their Nilometers, they now possessed a celestial alarm clock that told them exactly when to start looking. The star's return and the river's rise were locked in a cosmic dance, a partnership between the heavens and the earth that seemed to confirm a sacred order to the universe. This was not just a useful piece of information, it was the cornerstone of their entire calendar and their understanding of the world. The appearance of Sothis did not just predict a flood, it announced the Egyptian New Year, the opening of a cycle of life, death, and rebirth that was as reliable as the stars themselves. This celestial partnership with Sirius forced the Egyptians to become masters of time itself. They developed one of history's first solar calendars, a brilliant system with 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 extra days added at the year's end. This gave them a tidy 365-day year, a monumental achievement in organization. But this civil calendar contained a tiny, almost invisible flaw that would slowly warp their sense of time. A true solar year, the time it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun, is actually about 1/4 of a day longer than 365 days. That missing fraction, less than 6 hours each year, seems insignificant at first, but over time it adds up. Imagine your calendar as a wheel that is ever so slightly too small. With each revolution, it falls a tiny bit behind. After 4 years, your calendar is a full day behind the actual seasons. After 40 years, it is 10 days out of sync. A festival meant to celebrate the planting season would now occur when the harvest was already underway. The rhythm of their world was gradually slipping. This is where the heliacal rising of Sirius became their absolute anchor to reality. Because that star's appearance is fixed to the true solar year, it acted as an annual check, a celestial truth that could not be fooled. The priests would watch for Sothis, and when it rose, they knew the new year had truly begun, regardless of what their civil calendar said. They were living with 2 parallel timelines, one man-made and imperfect, the other divine and perfect. The grand scale of this drift became apparent over generations. The priests, with their centuries of archived records, observed a breathtaking pattern. It took exactly 1,460 years for their wandering civil calendar to complete a full cycle and realign perfectly with the solar year and the star Sirius. This immense period is what we now call the Sothic cycle. For the Egyptians, this was not just a mathematical curiosity. It was evidence of a cosmic order so vast it dwarfed human lifetimes. By tracking Sirius, they could correct their agricultural and ritual schedules, ensuring that the harvest festivals always happened at the harvest, and the prayers for the flood were spoken just as the waters began to stir. They used the unchanging heavens to tame the imperfections of their own brilliant invention, keeping their civilization in step with the universe. While the stars and stone gauges provided a grand celestial framework, the prediction of the Nile's flood was also a matter of reading the river's own subtle whispers. Long before the official priests made their measurements, ordinary farmers and local wise men were watching for a suite of natural omens, a form of deep ecological wisdom passed down through generations. They understood the river as a living entity, one that communicated its intentions through its color, its taste, and the behavior of the creatures that called it home. The first and most telling sign was the water's hue. When the Nile began to take on a distinct reddish-brown tint, it was a cause for both excitement and caution. This was the famous Red Flood, the water stained by volcanic silt washing down from the highlands of Ethiopia. That color was not just mud, it was a direct message that the distant summer rains had been heavy, promising a flood rich with the fertile soil that gave the Black Land its name. A weaker, greenish flood, however, signaled a different story. This color came from vegetation decay in the Central African lakes, and it often foretold a less potent rise, one that might not carry enough precious silt to nourish all the fields. The very taste of the water was a clue. A river that tasted sweet promised life, while a bitter one hinted at scarcity. And then there were the animals. The ancient Egyptians saw the natural world as deeply interconnected. The behavior of the Nile's most formidable residents, the hippos and crocodiles, was scrutinized closely. If these great beasts were seen moving to higher ground earlier than usual, it was a powerful, instinctive warning that they sensed a truly massive surge of water coming. Even the skies told a story. The arrival of specific migratory birds, their flight paths timed with the seasons, served as a feathered confirmation that the great cycle was turning. This was prediction rooted not in mathematics, but in a lifelong intimacy with a single, vital landscape. It was the difference between reading an official decree and hearing a trusted friend share a secret. This ancient wisdom, layered atop the precision of astronomy and hydrology, created a multi-layered forecast, ensuring that no sign from the gods, the stars, or the river itself would go unnoticed. The river's whispers and the star's signal were only part of the story. For the Egyptians, the flood was not a random act of nature, but the deliberate work of a god. He was Hapi, the divine personification of the Nile itself, a powerful deity depicted as a robust, androgynous figure with a crown of papyrus and lotus plants, his heavy chest symbolizing the abundance he carried. The annual rise of the waters was seen as Hapi's arrival, a divine visitation that demanded celebration, supplication, and profound gratitude. This was where the cold, hard data from the Nilometers met the fervent heat of religious faith. When the priests recorded a promising cubit measurement, it was not just a number, it was a message from Hapi himself, a sign of his favor. The entire civilization would erupt in a festival of thanks known as the Night of the Tear. According to myth, the flood began with a single tear shed by the goddess Isis, mourning her lost husband Osiris. This poignant story was reenacted in a grand ceremony, blending sorrow with the joy of impending renewal. Statues of Hapi were carried in lavish processions from the temples down to the river's edge. The people would throw offerings into the churning waters, gifts of amulets, jewelry, and even food, sacrifices to thank the god for his life-giving gift and to plead for his continued benevolence. The priests would chant hymns and perform sacred rites, their voices rising over the river, not to command the flood but to welcome it, to align the heart of the nation with the will of the god. A successful prediction from the stone steps was therefore more than a scientific achievement, it was a spiritual confirmation. A reading of 16 cubits meant Happy was pleased, his power was manifest, and the rituals had been accepted. This seamless fusion of observation and devotion created an unshakable confidence. The people worked the land with a sense of divine purpose, believing their civilization was sustained by a sacred contract between the heavens, the river god, and themselves. With the river's rise confirmed, the entire rhythm of life shifted. The Egyptians did not fight the flood, they surrendered to it, and in doing so, they unlocked one of their greatest strengths. Their year was divided into 3 distinct seasons, each dictated by the Nile's mood. The first of these was Akhet, the inundation. This was the time of the flood itself, a period when the familiar world dissolved into a vast, shallow lake. The villages and towns built on the high ground of natural tells became islands in a shimmering inland sea. For the farmer, this was a forced pause. His fields were not just wet, they were submerged under many feet of water, completely inaccessible for months. The annual farming cycle simply stopped. But a civilization cannot afford to have its entire workforce sit idle for a quarter of the year. This is where the pharaoh's foresight turned a potential economic disaster into an engine of creation. With the fields underwater and the population freed from agricultural labor, the state mobilized a massive, ready-made workforce. This was the secret behind the construction of Egypt's most iconic monuments. The same hands that would soon sow wheat and barley were now directed to a grander task. Think of the Great Pyramid at Giza, a mountain of stone erected with a precision that still baffles us. It was not built by slaves under the lash, but largely by skilled Egyptian laborers during the inundation. The state provided them with food, drink, and a sense of divine purpose. While the river nourished the land, the people nourished the legacy of their god-king. The floodwaters, therefore, did more than just fertilize the soil. They fertilized the entire culture, providing the time and concentrated manpower to build the temples, tombs, and pyramids that would define their civilization for millennia. As the floodwaters began their slow, inevitable retreat, the second season began, Peret, meaning the emergence. The land reappeared from the water, but it was transformed. It was not merely wet earth, but a thick, damp, and perfectly pliable blanket of the richest mud imaginable. The receding waters left behind a soil so soft and receptive that farmers did not need heavy plows. They could sow their seeds directly into the fertile slurry, sometimes even having herds of sheep and pigs trample the seeds into the perfect depth. This was a race against time, a frantic and joyful period of planting as the life-giving moisture still saturated the ground. The entire country shifted its focus back to the land, coaxing food from the gift left by the river. Finally, after months of growth under the Egyptian sun, came Shemu, the harvest. This was the season of dry heat and intense, coordinated labor. The grain was cut with sickles, gathered, and taken to the threshing floors. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of the entire annual cycle. The success of the harvest, determined by the height of the flood months earlier, would now fill the granaries that fed everyone from the pharaoh to the humblest laborer. It was this predictable, 3-part rhythm, inundation, emergence, harvest, that gave Egyptian civilization its incredible stability. The flood was not a disruption. It was the metronome that set the tempo for everything, from the daily life of a farmer to the eternal ambitions of a king. That precise cubit measurement read from the sacred steps was more than a prophecy. It was a national budget. The pharaoh's administrators, the brilliant bureaucratic mind of the state, transformed the Nilometer's number into an economic decree. The entire system of taxation was fluid, literally tied to the river's rise. Imagine the scene in the royal palace after the priests delivered the official cubit count. If the reading pointed to a 16-cubit flood, the ideal number of abundance, the vizier would authorize a high tax rate for the coming year. This was not an act of greed, but one of logical foresight. A massive harvest was expected, meaning every farmer could afford to contribute a larger portion of their bounty to the state granaries. This surplus was the kingdom's safety net. its strategic reserve for lean years and its capital for grand projects. But if the Nilometer at Elephantine reported a meager 12 cubits, the news triggered a very different response. The government knew a poor harvest was inevitable. In that case, the tax rate was slashed, sometimes to zero. This was a calculated act of survival. By reducing the financial burden on farmers, the state ensured that people could keep what little food they managed to grow, preventing widespread starvation and the social unrest that would inevitably follow. This flexible system created a remarkable stability. It acknowledged a simple truth: you cannot draw blood from a stone, and you cannot collect grain from a barren field. The tax assessors were not villains. They were pragmatic economists using the best data available to balance the books of an entire civilization. The river's height, therefore, determined not just what grew in the fields, but how much of it remained in the hands of the people who tended them. The very stones of their temples were tuned to the heavens. This grand architecture of prediction went far beyond simple stone markers in the river, extending into the design of their most sacred spaces. The Egyptians conceived their temples not just as houses for the gods, but as massive, static instruments for reading the sky. Their alignment was a form of frozen astronomy. Many major temples were positioned with their main axes pointing precisely toward the spot on the horizon where the sun would rise on the day of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. This was no accident. It was a deliberate architectural choice that transformed the entire building into a solar calendar. On that one morning, the first rays of the sun would shoot directly down the long, darkened hall of the temple, illuminating the inner sanctuary and the statue of the god within. It was a moment of divine connection, a confirmation that the cosmic order was intact and the solar cycle was proceeding as it should. This alignment served a practical purpose, providing an annual fixed point to correct any drift in their civil calendar. The temple itself became a confirmation of the sun's journey, a stone testament to the reliability of the cosmos. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the most famous and debated example of this celestial architecture. While its primary function was as a tomb, its precision suggests a deep knowledge of the stars. The pyramid's four sides are aligned with the four cardinal directions with an accuracy of within a fraction of a degree. Achieving this without modern tools is a staggering feat of engineering and observation. One compelling theory suggests its narrow, internal shafts were not simply air vents, but carefully angled sightlines to specific stars. The southern shaft from the king's chamber, for instance, is thought to have pointed directly toward Sirius, the star of Sothis. Imagine a priest in that silent, granite chamber, watching through the narrow tunnel as the light of that vital star pierced the darkness, a direct signal from the heavens announcing the coming flood. While this remains a theory, it illustrates a profound truth for the Egyptians. The boundary between the earthly and the celestial was porous. Their monuments were bridges between the two realms, designed to capture celestial events in stone and shadow, turning entire landscapes into a permanent observatory for predicting the rhythms of their world. Yet the river was a living god, not a machine, and even the most brilliant system could not tame its every whim. There were years when the celestial alarm clock rang, but Happy sent only a trickle. The Nile would fail to rise to the necessary cubits, and the desperate prayers from the temples went unanswered. The land baked under the sun, the soil cracked, and the seeds lay dormant in the dust. The specter of famine was not just a story, it was a memory carved into stone. An inscription from the era of Pharaoh Djoser speaks of 7 long years of misery, when the Nile did not flood and food was so scarce that men forgot their dignity. The inscription laments, "I am grieving on my throne. For 7 years there has been no water, so grain is scant, fruits are dried up, and everything which they eat has perished." In such times, the perfect rhythm of the seasons shattered. With no inundation, there was no emergence, and with no emergence, there was no harvest. The state granaries, those symbols of pharaonic foresight, were slowly emptied. The sound of construction on the pyramids would fall silent, replaced by the murmur of a hungry, restless populace. The social contract between the people and their god-king strained to its breaking point. A pharaoh who could not intercede with the gods to bring the flood was a pharaoh whose divine power was in question. Panic could spread through the villages faster than any disease. Rumors of the Nilometer's disastrous reading would turn into stories of the king's failure, of the gods' anger. The very order of the universe seemed to be collapsing. These catastrophic failures, these 7 lean years, were a brutal but essential teacher. They were the stark reminders that pushed the priests to observe more keenly, to archive more meticulously, and to refine their sacred science. The fear of the flood's absence was the relentless engine that drove them to seek an even deeper understanding of their world, a quest that would ultimately lead them to look beyond the river and the stars and into the very patterns of time itself. This sacred science was a secret locked within temple walls. The intricate knowledge of the stars, the river, and the Nilometers was not for public consumption. It was the exclusive domain of the priesthood and the pharaoh's inner court, a state secret more valuable than gold. Why guard the forecast of a natural event? Because this was not merely about predicting water, it was about controlling the 3 pillars of power. The first pillar was the food supply. By knowing in advance whether the harvest would be abundant or scarce, the state could dictate the entire economy. The priests, with their early readings from Elephantine, knew if the granaries would be overflowing or nearly empty months before the common farmer ever saw a sprout in his field. This allowed the pharaoh's administration to manipulate grain prices, to decide where to send relief, and to secure the loyalty of key regions by promising food in times of need. A population that is fed is a population that is placated, and the priesthood held the key to the kingdom's breadbasket. The second pillar was the labor force. Remember the millions of idle hands during the inundation. The state's ability to predict a good flood was also the ability to plan its monumental construction projects. If the Nilometers promised a 16-cubit flood, the viziers could confidently draft the workforce for a new pyramid or temple, knowing there would be a massive surplus of grain to feed them. If the reading was low, those projects were shelved and the people were told to conserve their energy. This control over massive public works cemented the pharaoh's legacy and demonstrated his power to reshape the very landscape. But the third and most crucial pillar was the narrative of divine right. The pharaoh was the living god, the intermediary between the people and the gods like Hapi and Osiris. His primary duty was to maintain Maat, the cosmic order. What better proof of his divine connection than the ability to accurately announce the will of the Nile? When the priests acting on the pharaoh's behalf declared that the flood would arrive with the heliacal rising of Sothis, and it did, it was not seen as clever astronomy. It was seen as the pharaoh's magic, his sacred power in action. He did not predict the flood, he commanded it through his relationship with the gods. A failed prediction, however, was a catastrophic blow to this carefully constructed narrative. It could suggest the gods were angry that the pharaoh had lost their favor. This is why the inner workings of prediction were so fiercely protected. If everyone understood the simple mechanics of the stone steps and the star charts, the mystery would vanish, and with it, the divine authority of the king. The secret knowledge was the source of their power, the invisible engine that kept the civilization running smoothly and the populace believing in the God who ruled them. Yet Egypt was not the only civilization whose lifeblood was a river. Far to the east, between the Tigris and Euphrates, lay Mesopotamia. Here, another great culture rose from the mud, but their relationship with the water was forged in terror, not gratitude. The Nile's flood was a predictable, gentle giant, arriving slowly and receding to leave its fertile gift. The twin rivers of Mesopotamia were wild and capricious. Their floods did not follow a reliable, celestial schedule. They could strike with violent fury in the spring, fueled by melting snows from distant mountains. utterly destroying the intricate network of canals and dikes the Mesopotamians built in a desperate attempt at control. Where the Egyptian priest walked calmly down stone steps to read the river's will, the Mesopotamian engineer stood on a dike, staring at a raging torrent that threatened to erase his entire world. This fundamental difference shaped their very souls. The Egyptians developed a calendar and a cosmology based on confident prediction. They saw a universe of benevolent order. The Mesopotamians, living at the mercy of chaotic waters, saw a world ruled by vengeful, unpredictable gods. Their omens were not gentle whispers from a river god, but terrifying signs in the livers of sheep, seeking to decipher the anger of deities who might wipe out a city on a whim. The technology each society perfected reflects this deep-seated worldview. Egypt's genius lay in observation, in Nilometers and stellar clocks. Mesopotamia's legacy was one of brute force engineering, of massive ziggurats reaching for the heavens and complex irrigation systems constantly fighting against nature's chaos. One culture learned to listen to the river's rhythm, the other was forced to try and tame its rage. The mastery of the Nile was a secret too powerful to remain locked in the desert sands forever. When the legions of Rome first marched into Egypt, they came as conquerors, but they left as students. The Roman administrators, masters of engineering and law, were utterly astounded by the system they found. Here was a civilization that had not merely endured its river, but had learned to converse with it, to predict its moods with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. The centerpiece of this system, the Nilometer, captivated them. It was a tool of governance more sophisticated than any census or tax ledger they possessed. The Romans immediately recognized its immense practical value and did what they did best. They adopted it, systematized it, and spread its principles throughout their growing empire. This was not a mere copy, but a full integration of Egyptian genius into the Roman machine of state. The Roman prefect, the new governor of Egypt, took on the role once held by the pharaoh's priests, receiving the annual cubit measurement as the official start of the fiscal year. The river's number now dictated the grain shipments that would feed the city of Rome itself, making the Nile's prediction a matter of imperial survival. The knowledge of the Black Land became a strategic asset for the entire classical world. Roman scholars, with their insatiable appetite for cataloging the known world, became the guardians of this Egyptian wisdom. The most famous of these was Pliny the Elder, a man whose curiosity would ultimately cost him his life during the eruption of Vesuvius. In his monumental work, Natural History, he devoted careful attention to the phenomena of the Nile. He documented the timing of its flood, the significance of the star Sirius, and the ingenious design of the Nilometers themselves. His writing was not that of a mystic, but of a practical observer, preserving the mechanics of the system for a Latin reading audience. He recorded the vital cubit measurements, noting that 12 cubits meant hunger for Egypt, while 13 brought contentment and 16 promised unbounded joy. Through his work and that of other scholars, the sacred science of the Egyptian priesthood was translated, codified, and entered the libraries of the Mediterranean. This act of preservation was crucial, for it meant that when Egypt itself eventually faded from its ancient glory, its greatest hydrological secrets did not vanish into the dust. They were kept alive on papyrus and parchment, a testament waiting to be rediscovered by future civilizations who would once again seek to read the language of the rivers. The Roman codification of Egyptian knowledge was not the final chapter. As the classical world gave way to new empires, the sacred science of the Nile found its next great guardians in the scholars of the medieval Islamic world. When Muslim armies took control of Egypt in the 7th century, they inherited a functioning, millennia-old system of prediction, and they did not simply maintain it. They became its most meticulous chroniclers and analysts. These geographers and historians were driven by a quest for knowledge that spanned the known world, and the Nilometer, with its perfect blend of practical utility and cosmic significance, captivated their intellectual curiosity. They governed Egypt, but they also studied it, ensuring the river's pulse continued to be measured and its secrets documented for a new age. One of the most important of these figures was Al-Masudi, a 10th century historian and geographer often called the Herodotus of the Arabs. In his vast work, The Meadows of Gold, he did not just mention the Nilometer in passing. He provided exhaustive, almost loving descriptions of its operation. He detailed the specific cubit measurements that signaled famine or plenty, and he recorded the intricate ceremonies that still surrounded the annual reading. His writing provides a vital bridge, confirming that the rituals observed by the pharaoh's priests were still being performed centuries later, a continuous thread of scientific observation. This was not a lost art being rediscovered, but a living tradition being faithfully recorded by a new culture that valued its precision. Other scholars, like the great geographer Al-Idrisi, created stunningly accurate maps that included the Nilometer's location, treating it as a landmark as essential as any city or mountain. They understood that this stone instrument was the key to the land's wealth, the very heart of Egypt's agricultural engine. Their extensive writings transformed local Egyptian knowledge into a part of the broader Islamic scientific corpus, a data point in a global network of learning that stretched from Spain to India. The survival of this system through another major shift in power and culture proves a profound point. The need to predict the Nile's behavior was bigger than any single empire, religion, or dynasty. It was a fundamental requirement for life itself in the Black Land, a scientific challenge so vital that each new civilization that arrived felt compelled to learn its language, preserving a thread of understanding that now spanned thousands of years. That delicate dance with the river could not last forever. The 20th century arrived with a new religion, the belief that man could not just predict nature but command it. The first major intervention was the Aswan Low Dam, completed in 1902. It was a formidable barrier of stone and steel, designed to hold back a portion of the annual flood, releasing its water throughout the year for more consistent irrigation. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Nile's natural rhythm was being artificially regulated. The low dam was a compromise, a check on the river's power, but it was not the final word. The true revolution came with the Aswan High Dam, a project of such colossal scale it reshaped the very geography of Egypt. When it was completed in 1970, it was one of the largest embankment dams in the world, creating the massive reservoir known as Lake Nasser. The dam's primary goal was absolute control, to finally end the cycle of drought and deluge that had defined Egyptian life since the first pharaoh. In this, it was a spectacular success. The terrifying specter of famine was virtually eliminated. The destructive power of a 19-cubit flood was consigned to history. For the first time, Egypt had a permanent, reliable supply of water for irrigation and a massive source of hydroelectric power that lit up its cities. The ancient art of prediction, the sacred science of the Nilometers and the stars, was rendered instantly, utterly obsolete. The priests were no longer needed because the engineers had built a new god. But this victory came at a profound and unexpected cost. The life-giving flood was not just water, it was a delivery system for the fertile silt that had built the Black Land itself. That rich, dark soil now had a new destination. It settled behind the massive walls of the High Dam, silently filling the bottom of Lake Nasser. The river that flowed downstream was clean, controlled, and sterile. The land was no longer renewed each year. Farmers now had to rely entirely on artificial fertilizers to nourish their crops, a permanent chemical dependency that the old river never demanded. The Nile had been tamed, but in the process, its greatest gift was trapped, and an ancient partnership that had sustained a civilization for millennia was permanently broken. The rediscovery of these stone prophets began not with a grand announcement, but with a slow, careful scraping away of centuries. modern archaeologists arriving at sites like Elephantine or Rhoda Island faced a unique puzzle. They were not uncovering a single frozen moment in time. The Nilometer before them was a palimpsest of history, its stones bearing the fingerprints of pharaohs, Greek rulers, Roman emperors, and Islamic caliphs. Each layer of repair, each new facing of stone was a testament. It was a civilization leaving a note for the next, saying, "This is too important to lose." The original pharaonic core, built with that characteristically precise, massive stonework, might be encased in rougher Roman brick. That Roman structure, in turn, could be crowned with elegant Arabic calligraphy, marking the water levels for a new era of rulers. Excavating such a site was like reading a history book written by a dozen different authors, all on the same page, all about the same vital subject. The greatest challenge was untangling this timeline without destroying the very evidence they sought. How do you determine which pharaoh first ordered the staircase carved, when a Ptolemaic engineer later widened it, and a Mamluk sultan finally added the decorative archway overhead? The answer lay in the debris, the pottery shards, and the coins dropped by workers and forgotten in the mortar. A Greek coin found in a repair layer dated that specific renovation to the Ptolemaic period. Fragments of a specific type of Roman amphora buried at the foundation confirmed when a new well shaft was added. These mundane objects became the Rosetta Stone for understanding the structure's long life. This layered history tells a powerful story that goes beyond architecture. It reveals that the need to predict the Nile was the one constant in a land of endless change. Dynasties rose and fell, religions transformed, and languages evolved, but the silent, annual climb of the river's water up those steps remained the unchanging reality of power. Every new ruler, whether they worshipped Osiris, Zeus, or Allah, knew that their legitimacy depended on their ability to answer the same old question: how high will the river rise? The Nilometer was not just a measuring device, it was the ultimate symbol of a contract with the land itself, a contract that every successful civilization in Egypt was forced to sign. The stone steps of the Nilometer gave us the numbers, but the papyrus scrolls give us the voices. While archaeologists uncovered the physical instruments, another group of scholars was performing a different kind of excavation, working in quiet libraries to decipher faded ink on brittle plant fibers. These philologists and historians are the linguists of lost worlds. They're tasked to reassemble a civilization's knowledge from fragments. They do not work with shovels and brushes, but with grammar and context, painstakingly matching symbols to sounds and meanings across the gulf of millennia. Their work reveals that the Egyptians were not just observers, they were meticulous accountants of their own system. One of the most revealing documents is the Rhind mathematical papyrus. At first glance, it is a scribe's training manual, a collection of mathematical problems and solutions. But look closer, and you see the ghost of the Nile in every calculation. It contains problems about dividing loaves of bread among men, a fundamental task of rationing. More crucially, it details complex geometry for measuring plots of land. Why was this so vital? Because after the annual flood receded, the river's action would often erase the boundary markers between fields. The state needed to restore these property lines with absolute fairness to prevent disputes and ensure accurate taxation. The papyrus provides the formula for calculating the area of a round field, a direct and practical response to the flood's aftermath. Our modern understanding of their prediction methods is therefore a mosaic. We have the architectural evidence of the aligned temples and the Nilometers themselves. We have the textual evidence from papyri like the Rhind, which show us the bureaucratic machinery that processed the flood data. And we have the astronomical evidence preserved in star charts and celestial myths. None of these pieces alone tells the complete story. It is only by fitting them together, the stone, the text, and the star, that the brilliant, integrated picture of Egyptian science finally emerges from the desert sands. Those ancient priests meticulously inking the river's height onto papyrus were not just serving their pharaoh. They were creating a gift for the future, a data set whose true value would only be unlocked 1,000 years later. The relentless daily work of generations of Egyptian and Islamic scribes has yielded an astonishing prize for modern science, the world's longest continuous historical record of a river's behavior. This is not a reconstruction from tree rings or ice cores, but a direct human-made account of the Nile's pulse, stretching back in an unbroken chain for over 1,000 years. Climatologists today treat these archives like a sacred text of the Earth's past climate. The meticulous records from the Islamic period, in particular, are a gold standard of historical data. They are so precise and consistent that scientists can convert the ancient cubit measurements into modern cubic meters of water flow, creating a timeline of flood intensity with a resolution that is simply unavailable anywhere else on the planet. This allows us to peer back through time and see how the Nile reacted to global climate shifts that were mere theories before. During the medieval warm period, a time when Vikings farmed green pastures in Greenland, the Nilometer records show a clear and persistent pattern of lower, weaker floods. The river was suffering, and the data confirms that this was a time of recurring drought and stress for Egypt, correlating perfectly with a warmer northern hemisphere. Centuries later, when the world shivered through the Little Ice Age, the records tell a different story. The archives suddenly show a dramatic spike in high, powerful floods, with years of devastating 19-cubit deluges becoming frighteningly common. The river was raging, its behavior transformed by a cooler global climate. This ancient data is now a critical tool. By understanding how the Nile responded to past global warming and cooling, scientists can refine their models for our current era of climate change. The river's long memory, carefully preserved on those fragile scrolls, is helping us predict the future of water security for millions who still depend on its flow today. The same fundamental principle that guided the priests of Elephantine now guides satellites in orbit. Ancient Egypt's sacred science of the Nile was the birth of hydrology, a discipline built on one unwavering rule: you must measure what you wish to understand. Today's scientists have simply scaled that principle to a global level, replacing the stone step with a radar pulse. Modern satellite altimetry works on a concept the Egyptian priests would have grasped instantly, measuring the height of a surface by timing a signal's return. A satellite hundreds of miles above the Earth sends a radar wave down to the river's surface. The time it takes for that wave to bounce back reveals the exact water level with centimeter precision. This is the Nilometer's celestial descendant, a silent, automated priest taking a daily reading of every major river on the planet from the vacuum of space. The network of stone sentinels along the Nile has been replaced by a constellation of electronic eyes, creating a real-time, global picture of Earth's freshwater pulse. The goal, however, is eerily familiar: to predict floods and droughts, to manage resources, and to feed populations. The ancient Egyptians could only measure their own river, but their foundational idea that systematic, long-term data is power now protects billions. We see this legacy in the flood forecasts for the Mississippi River Basin, which rely on decades of historical data to model the complex behavior of spring rains and snowmelt, a direct echo of the priests comparing their current scrolls to the archives of their ancestors. We see it in the meticulous monitoring of aquifer depletion in India, where falling groundwater levels are tracked with the same urgency as a low cubit reading in a year of famine. The tools have transformed from chisel and papyrus to quantum sensors and cloud servers, but the intellectual architecture remains the same. The Egyptians proved that to survive a force of nature, you must first become its most dedicated student, learning its language, its rhythm, and its hidden patterns. Every environmental scientist today stands on the shoulders of those early observers who first understood that the future of civilization could be read in the rising touch of water on stone. For all their genius, the Egyptians' predictions stopped at the river's edge. They knew the star Sothis heralded the rise, and they measured its power with stunning accuracy, but did they ever truly understand where the flood was born? Their texts speak of the Nile's celestial origins, flowing from the caverns of the underworld, but they were silent on the true source, the distant monsoon rains pounding the Ethiopian highlands. This remains one of history's great silences. Did a lone trader venturing far to the south bring back tales of torrential seasonal rains that began just before the river swelled in Egypt? Were these stories dismissed as fantasy, or were they considered a state secret so profound that it was never committed to papyrus? We may never know. The sheer scale of their astronomical achievement also hides a tantalizing gap. We understand the Sothic cycle as a period of 1,460 years, but the method they used to compute this vast celestial clock is lost to us. The mathematical prowess displayed in the Rhind papyrus is formidable, yet the leap to tracking a cycle that spans 15 centuries is staggering. Did they possess star charts so ancient they predated the pyramids themselves, allowing them to see the slow, majestic drift of their calendar against the fixed point of Sirius? Or was it a cumulative realization passed down through generations of priests who noticed that the stories of their great-great-grandfathers no longer matched the sky? The answers likely resided in papyrus scrolls that have long since crumbled to dust, or perhaps in a library that still lies buried beneath the sand, a sealed chamber containing the final, untold chapters of their sacred science. Every new archaeological discovery offers the chance that such a cache might be found, a hidden archive that could transform our understanding of this ancient quest to read the world. The story of the Nile's prediction is not a closed book, but a scroll still waiting to be unrolled. From stone steps to satellite signals, the legacy of the Nile's prediction is a testament to human ingenuity. The ancient Egyptians wove a single, unbreakable thread connecting the stars in the sky, the stone in the river, and the ledger in the temple. They fused astronomy with engineering, religion with bureaucracy, creating a system so resilient it outlasted dynasties and empires. They did not have our technology, but they possessed a profound understanding of observation, pattern, and consequence. They proved that solving a civilization-scale problem requires not one brilliant idea, but a tapestry of interconnected solutions. So the next time you hear about an ancient culture, see them not as primitive people from a lost world, but as the ultimate innovators. Their genius is not just in the pyramids they left behind, but in the very ideas that kept those pyramids being built year after year, flood after flood. Their legacy is all around us, in every river forecast and every effort to secure our future against an unpredictable world. What part of this ancient feat of prediction amazes you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.